In this first episode of this channel, we'll tell you in great detail how a miserable village surrounded by insects and disease once became England's most thriving city, and how slavery played such an important role in its rapid growth. Sit back and enjoy the story of one of the most important breeding grounds for musicians and singers of the 20th century, and the birthplace of the most famous and successful musical group of all time. The exquisite and fascinating story tells us that in 1207, King John I of England, known worldwide by the not-so-glamorous nickname John Lackland, who had ruled England since 1199, granted the few inhabitants of the Liverpool area the municipal franchises enjoyed by other coastal cities. Consequently, Liverpool was declared a port, and that date is considered the official founding date. Until 1551, Liverpool was nothing more than a humble and impoverished village plagued by countless insects, pests, vermin, diseases, and a wide variety of poisonous animals that emerged by the thousands from the immense swamps and mudflats surrounding the area, where approximately 500 unfortunate people had managed to survive hardly under these deplorable, inhumane conditions, rampant unsanitary conditions, and the extremely high risk of mortality that swarmed all around them. Liverpool, the great Liverpool, the glorious Liverpool, the birthplace of the most important and transcendental group in the world, the Beatles. Liverpool, the birthplace of the four most famous faces of pop music: pop rock, rock and roll. You choose the musical style that suits your taste. John, Paul, George, and Ringo spent their childhood and adolescence in this blessed and generous land in musical talent. They ran around its streets, got into countless pranks, got their first jobs, surrounded themselves with countless friends, learned to play their first musical instruments, and began to discover their artistic talents, so that years later they would put their beloved Liverpool on the restless radar of the wonderful world of entertainment. The first Beatle to enter the world was Richard Starkey on July 7, 1940, in the Dingle neighborhood. 3 months later, on October 9, John Winston Lennon was born at the maternity hospital on Oxford Street. James Paul McCartney was born on June 18, 1942, at Walton General Hospital. And 9 months later, George Harrison was born on February 25, 1943, at Wavertree. Curiously, 2 of the founding Beatles, who played a fundamental role in the group's gestation period, were not born in Liverpool. Bassist Stuart Ferguson Sutcliffe, the painter-turned-musician, who was born in Edinburgh, Scotland, the legendary Scotland, on June 23, 1940. And last but not least, drummer Randolph Pete Best, who was born in Madras, India, on November 24, 1941. Liverpool, a port city in northwest England, extends along the banks of the Mersey estuary. Today, it boasts a vast architectural heritage and has been described by English Heritage as England's finest Victorian city. Numerous iconic sites have been declared by UNESCO World Heritage Sites, including the Cavern Club, the Casbah Coffee Club, the Beatles Museum, and the Hard Day's Night Hotel, to name just a few. At the dawn of the 20th century, this port area enjoyed the privilege of being the most flourishing city in northern England, as a major center for cotton and wool trade with the United States. However, after World War II, it gradually declined in importance. During the 18th century, slavery was thriving, and Liverpool became Britain's main slave port. Between 1700 and 1807, ships from Liverpool transported around 1.5 million Africans across the Atlantic in conditions of utter barbarism and cruelty. Most of the Liverpool ships were bound for the Caribbean islands, where heartless captains, devoid of any trace of humanity, sold these African souls to wealthy and greedy plantation owners. Not a drop of mercy ran through the veins of these landowners, and displaying incredible contempt for humanity, they forced Africans to work as slaves in the production of sugar and other tropical products, treating the enslaved abominably and brutally, and showing little or no concern or consideration for them. The first known slave ship to set sail from Liverpool was the Liverpool Merchant, which left the port on October 3, 1699, carrying 220 enslaved Africans in its dark and fetid bowels bound for Barbados. The abhorrent slave trade, a common practice at that time, we sadly have to say, was one of the main sources of Liverpool's exorbitant wealth, prosperity, and growth. According to gruesome statistics, from 1730 to 1770, a period of 50 years, 2,000 slave ships left that port city. It is estimated that in a span of 11 years, these ships alone transported no less than 304,000 slaves to the American colonies, who were sold for approximately 400 million francs, representing a net profit of 200 million francs for the ruthless and immoderately greedy merchants in the human trade. These sums of money were gigantic, astonishing, inconceivable for the time. A horrifying historical fact tells us that virtually all of the city's leading inhabitants, including mayors, councillors, and members of parliament, invested in the slave trade in one way or another, directly or indirectly, and profited generously from it. By the end of the 18th century, Liverpool controlled more than 40% of the European slave trade and 80% of the United Kingdom's. Although the vast majority of these unfortunate slaves from Africa were transported on ships from Liverpool to America in the 18th century, some Africans had managed to achieve their long-awaited freedom, start families, and continue living in this port city. Most of them served as domestic servants and trusted people, and also worked as gardeners or laborers on estates and plantations under better living conditions and with respect. They were no longer treated with the harshness, contempt, and mercilessness of the years of ominous slavery. Today, traces of the transatlantic slave trade can still be seen around the city center. For example, Bold, Tarleton, and Cunliffe streets are among many of the overland transit routes bearing the ineffable and infamous names of unscrupulous traders who engaged in the practice of slavery as a business. After the abolition of the transatlantic slave trade in 1807, the city's merchants used their connections to maintain trade with the continents of Africa and the Americas. Several former captains and slave traders developed a highly profitable trade in African palm oil, and gradually Liverpool came to dominate all British trade with West Africa. The cotton trade was an important factor in Liverpool's growth in the 19th century. The economic benefits also spread to Manchester, other Lancashire cities, and the British economy in general. But long before that, beginning in the 18th century, Liverpool began to expand enormously due to the booming trade, and by the beginning of the 19th century, 40% of all world maritime trade passed through Liverpool's docks. It is currently the second largest port in the United Kingdom in terms of export volume after its capital, London. By the mid-19th century, the Port of Liverpool had 25 basins, large and spacious facilities where vessels could be easily loaded and unloaded. These basins covered an area of 25 hectares, providing good shelter for the thousands of ships arriving from all over the world. More than 30,000 ships peacefully entered this well-known British port. At that time, Liverpool's main exports were cotton, wool, sugar, tea, timber, dyes, wine, leather, and much, much more. By the mid-20th century, Liverpool was no longer exactly a Garden of Eden, but rather a sad, grey, and melancholic city. Its skies were crossed by Hitler's planes, as on September 1, 1939, Germany had invaded Poland, beginning the atrocious and bloody Second World War, forcing Great Britain and France to declare war on Germany. The previously peaceful Liverpool was the victim of 80 bombing raids that claimed the lives of 2,500 innocent people and damaged almost half of the houses and buildings. In the midst of one of these merciless Nazi bombings, a boy would be born who, years later, at the beginning of his adolescence, would found a skiffle group with his humble friends that would later become the most famous and revolutionary musical group in history, the Beatles. In our next chapter, we'll tell you the interesting story of John Lennon's Welsh roots. We'll recount the series of vicissitudes that the great-grandparents of the creator of In My Life had to go through in order to be together and move to Liverpool, where the legend of one of the most successful and celebrated musicians and composers of our contemporary era would begin to take shape. Don't miss it.